Senator, thank you for your time. Do you agree with Chris Pyne? Has the coalition got this one in the bag?
Well, I'm greatly heartened by Christopher's confidence and optimism. That's wonderful and encouraging. Personally, I won't be letting off any party poppers just yet. I'll prefer to wait until all the votes are counted, but certainly it's looking better at this end of the week than it was at the start of the week. It was looking to be incredibly tight there. Now, with a lot of those postal votes coming in, particularly in the Queensland seats, I think there is reason to be quietly optimistic, quietly confident at this point that the coalition will narrowly get over the line and should be able to have a majority in its own right.
Are you and your colleagues still in a bit of a state of shock as to the result in the end?
A little bit. I think that's fair. It certainly wasn't what we were hoping for and probably not what we expected, but that's the thing about elections. You can't ever be sure. You can't take anything for granted. I know when the Prime Minister said during the campaign that there was a risk of a hung parliament, there are many people who are really sceptical, who laughed it off, but it turns out he was spot on the money and we'll be very close to a hung parliament. Obviously, we're hopeful that it won't be and we'll have a majority government.
So where did you go wrong? Where was the miscommunication along the way?
It's hard to pinpoint it at this early, at this stage. We'll know a bit more, I think, once the votes are fully counted and we can sit back and reflect and analyse on it. But clearly there are a number of issues. I think most people have said at the top of that list is the Medicare issue. That definitely cut through and had an impact with a lot of voters.
So that was a mistake not to address that stronger earlier?
Well, I mean, obviously, by definition, and what we didn't successfully deal with it because we've come close to losing government in part because of it. Whether or not there was anything we could have done differently in the campaign is another question. Clearly, Labor was determined to go out and put out what we regard as an outrageous lie, and that's a pretty hard thing to grapple with and respond to. It's very easy to put out a falsehood. It's very hard to correct it, and so I don't envy anyone's task in having to manage that.
What about the lessons from your own message on the economic narrative, for example? Was that misguided?
I don't think so. I think the Australian people were encouraged to see that we had an economic plan. That was something we're getting a lot of feedback about. I certainly found on polling booths that people were encouraged by that. Maybe they didn't understand the detail of it. Perhaps that's an issue. Or maybe they weren't convinced by some of the details of it. That's not clear yet at this stage. But they were heartened to know that we had a plan because they are uncertain about the economy. They are aware it's going through a transition. That's all. That's the feedback that we got consistently throughout the campaign.
Here in Victoria, how much of an impact do you think the CFA dispute ended up having on the results? We note, of course, that this morning the Liberal Party has claimed Chisholm. Could things have been a lot worse for you in Victoria without that dispute? It
was definitely one significant factor, but it wasn't the only one. In the seat of Chisholm, for example, there aren't any CFA brigades, but there is the CFA headquarters in Chisholm, in Burwood there. But there's Skyrail, for example, which affects a lot of communities in Chisholm, and I think a range of other issues. So you can't pinpoint it to any one thing, but it certainly didn't help the Labor Party. It took them way off message, and it really did raise a lot of concerns with Victorians about if this is what an Andrews government would do, what would a Shorten government do? We did see swings to Labor in Latrobe, McEwen, Bendigo. Again, do you think that would have been a lot worse, though? Potentially. It was interesting breaking down booth by booth, though, where those swings were. So in Latrobe, for example, in a really fire-prone area like Beaconsfield, we had a big swing to us, and in the less fire-prone, more urban areas, there were swings to Labor. So you could say that Medicare worked in the urban areas and CFA worked in the rural areas. It's impossible to say for certain, but that's what it looks like. We heard from Cory Bernardi earlier this week. He's launched, again, pushing for, I guess, a conservative movement within the Liberal Party. Is that something that will destabilise Malcolm Turnbull's leadership? My sense from speaking to colleagues is there's just absolutely no appetite at all for mucking around with leadership. I mean, imagine how harshly the Australian people would judge us if immediately after the election we turned to introspection and personality disputes. I think that would be very harshly judged and we'd be punished for it. I think having a small majority actually means that you have to focus even more on being united behind the leader and supporting him. But look, Cory is a friend and a greatly valued colleague, and I think he brings a lot to the Liberal Party. I think he represents a significant proportion of opinion of Liberal Party voters and supporters, and potentially part of the opinion of the people that we lost that have gone to vote for other minor parties. Commentators often lump you in with Cory Bernardi because of your background, the IPA, and your connections with the Liberal Senator Cory Bernardi. Could his push to boost this Conservative movement see the Liberal Party go more down the Labor path of having more sort of formalised factions than currently? Yeah, well, I mean, Corey and I agree on many things, but there's actually things that we disagree on as well. And the great thing about Corey is he doesn't expect everyone to have the exact same view as him, and he understands that, you know, he's got to be out there advocating for his point of view and trying to persuade colleagues and voters to agree with him. I don't ever think we'll get down that Labor path. We just don't have the same culture and institutions with the unions to have that kind of enforced factional arrangements that they have. But we do have strong intellectual, philosophical strands that clash from time to time, and I think it's a healthy thing in a political party. We do represent, you know, liberalism and conservatism, and I think that's a good fusion.
Can you see this movement becoming a sort of get-up type organisation?
Potentially, and if anyone can do it, Corey Bernardi's the one to do it, but there have been attempts to do this in the past, and it has been a bit difficult. I think that is in part because Conservatives and Liberals are not as inclined to activism as people on the left are. The left are kind of raised in a way on activism and campaigns, and Conservatives haven't tended to have that same kind of behaviour.
Conservatives have been pushing for Tony Abbott to be back in the fold, back on the front bench. Would you like to see that happen?
Look, that's really above my pay grade. That's a matter for the PM. I'm pleased that Tony Abbott's still in Parliament.
You have a view. You're a Liberal sitting member in the Senate?
Yeah, but as a humble backbencher, it's not really appropriate for me to, you know, sail forth on those issues. I'm happy to leave that to the PM. That's really his decision to pick his team. But I am happy that Tony Abbott is part of the Parliament. I do think he's got something to contribute. I do think he represents many of the people who did vote for us at this election, and I hope he plays a role. But whatever role that is, it's up to the PM.
Senator James Paterson, appreciate your analysis of how it's all gone over the past week. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ashleigh.